industry, a music producer seeking new techniques, or someone who simply wants to gain a deeper understanding of the music business, Music with a Twist is the perfect platform for you. Hi, hello, and welcome to yet another episode of Music with a Twist. Today we will be interviewing or talking with Mr. Todd Roberts. So, Todd, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and yourself?
Of, of course. Yeah, my name is Todd Roberts. I am an A&R person, traditionally. That's kind of a role that's somewhat extinct these days. There's less and less of us, but I work with artists directly to help in their careers. And that's kind of the definition of it, artists and repertoire. So helping them to find content, find songs, find their footing, essentially establish their story, if you will. But yeah, I do that across publishing, recorded works, and also with management.
Okay, cool. Can you give us a little bit of an insight of a recent or a current project that you're working on right now with A&R?
Yes, I am working on a artist project for a producer named Benny Hayes. Benny is out of Jacksonville, Florida. He'd been stationed here or located here in LA for a long time, working with different publishers. He developed a artist named Super Duper Kyle. He helped develop Mac Miller quite a bit in his early stages. He's worked with Anderson .Paak, a number of others. Fantastic talent. He moved away from LA, kind of disenchanted with the traditional music. They call it a hamster wheel. Kind of felt like he wasn't cutting through the way he wanted to in terms of as a creative, doing the kinds of projects he wanted to be doing. So he moved to Jacksonville with his family. I met him or reconnected with him in the last couple of years, and frankly, just fell in love with kind of his vision for things. So he's been working on an incubator in Florida. A couple of artists that he's met through the local community there started developing their projects. So I'm really kind of working as an executive producer to kind of help him essentially steward these projects to fruition. So he's got his own solo project. It'll be more of a dance, kind of 90s dance, if you will, project. He's also working on a R&B, kind of neo R&B project with a kid named Deb Aaron. And then he's got a kind of a alt shoegaze project with a artist named Boy Band. So we're working on 3 of those. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That sounds pretty cool. So do you have any genres that you like to work with in particular?
No, I mean, I like to be agnostic, and I think my background has been traditionally electronic music, and that's kind of how I came into the space. I started working with Virgin Records as an A&R there back in the 90s. Daft Punk, Air, Phoenix, a number of others were kind of my folks that I was working with the most. But I think for me, it's really about good, talented artists. I don't really know that genre for me has made much sense these days. It's fleeting, in terms of like what it means to the younger audiences, and even frankly what it means to me as I'm a little older, but an artist or a listener has been around for a while. I think genre is kind of something that I know a lot of people do have their favorite genre, but as far as an A&R, I just try to find good talent and work with them.
Okay, so that's pretty interesting, to see that as an A&R, you're looking to explore different genres, that it's very specific with the globalization of music, especially when it ties into cross-culture collaborations, and with a lot of emerging markets being represented right now in developing countries and the impact of global trends. Now, we are going to touch on music trends a little bit, but let's talk a little bit about cross-cultural collaborations. Have you done any? Are you interested in exploring the rise
Of
that's
course.
going right now, especially with Afro music, apart from J-pop and K-pop music,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Piano was something that kind of hit my radar a number of years ago. You know, I want to work across any, like I said, any genre, any territory. I do really love the Latin space and how that's crossed with electronic and hip hop and urban. I see the same thing with Afro music. I think there's so many different and again, going back to the idea of what do I focus on genre-wise, I think it is really the individual or the artist themselves that crafts the sound and their story. So I think with regards to that, there's an infinite opportunity to kind of work with different artists and different producers in all the different genres and all the different territories there are. Um, so I'm really interested. So there's an artist right now that's hit my radar. He's very young. He's living in Maryland. He's from Uruguay. Um, More or less a Latin artist, I would say, but he has an alternative kind of point of view. His name is Luca, and Luca just came out of college. Got out of college, started teaching. That's what he's doing now. I just spoke to him probably half an hour ago. Um, but I would put him in with Rosalia meets Bad Bunny, and then Thundercat on some level. I mean, I think he meets all those kinds of criteria in terms of the types of genres and the types of regional aspects of music that are important right now.
Yeah, I noticed that you um, um, mentioned that you like techno, and I know that Latin music has a lot of techno in it, and touching on music
It
from,
can.
but yeah.
Yeah, it can. I mean, I think, I don't want to say techno. I think techno is a subgenre of electronic, but I think that, yeah, with regards to Latin, Latin takes on, and that's a very interesting genre that you're mentioning. Like Latin definitely does take on almost every aspect of music, percussional. It takes on African percussion. It takes on, because we're talking about the diaspora, right? We're talking about how human beings have moved around the world and have laid their impression on where they live now. My folks are from New Orleans, um, and if you talk about what kind of arrived there and what the music sounds like, it's everything. So that's why even more so genre does not really kind of resonate with in terms of names, but
Mhm.
in terms of feeling, I think you can hear it all.
Yeah, it's funny that spoke about your originations being from New Orleans. Did you said?
Yep, that's where my folks are from. I'm not from there. I'm
Oh,
from here. Yeah.
oh, okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, and it's almost like everything is just like a melting pot of music. You have different sounds from here and there. I know noticed that you spoke about the drums and percussions and the different sounds in the Latin music that is represented from different groups. And we know that right now in the music industry, like I said earlier, globalization is pretty big, and a lot of persons are now exploring with NFTs, and the impact of music distribution and how this is all affecting us. And I wanted to talk a little bit about NFTs and the digital ownership of it. How has it affected you as A&R manager? Are your artists exploring with it? I know personally for myself, I gave it a try for a while. It was pretty cool. I've tried it out with art as well. And I'm still like grasping the whole concept of, using wallets and then seeing that you have so much different blockchains. But how is it for you with that
I
and
mean,
the
blockchain is, yeah, I mean, not to cut you off, but I think, yeah, you're right. NFT is a very fascinating
Mhm.
idea. And I think, blockchain kind of being the thing that been derived into NFTs and what they mean. Blockchain itself, I think, is a fantastic concept because it really sort of lowers the threshold for artists to have to appeal to a broad audience. I think there's a way for super fans with regards to NFTs to get involved, to own music again or own pieces of music content. Like you mentioned art. I think the fundamentals of blockchain are fascinating in the sense they allow co-ownership or collaboration across multiple different, and it's about participation, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Even with super fans being involved with on the NFT side, everyone has to sort of pay to be involved and put their either sweat equity, their elbow grease, their attention span, or their money. And I think each of those is it's very important to what I think the fabric of the music economy is going to mean. Sorry, I'm getting a call.
That's fine.
Um, and I think that, yeah, I think you're speaking to something that's a little further off for me in terms of what the reality is. I think the NFT craze kind of came and went a little bit, at least in terms of the first wave of people that are going to tune in. Sort of those people that are hyper focused on um, the technological foundations of the music business. Um, but I don't think it's done yet. I think it's something that still needs to evolve. And I think initially NFTs, because it's a craze, just like blockchain, it kind of goes up and down with the attention span of people. So I think
Mm-hmm.
those things not having this sort of, I think they don't have this much traction or value to the people that really that would want to own those things long term. And I think there's a lot of people that kind of cashed in early and thought that they were going to have something that was going to have a long lasting value. I think with regards to that, eventually, those super fans or those fan clubs or those communities, I would say more or less communities of people that are around different artists in their communities, there's going to be a lot of trading of, if you look at things like the Grateful Dead, there was an economy around mixtapes or live tapes. There would be a whole section of people that would tape each concert, and they could go on the whatever platform and sell these tapes to their other fans that were perhaps not there. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a good model to think about what an artist and then what the kind of NFTs or the sort of owned content space around them could mean. I just
Mm-hmm.
don't think that we're there in terms of really any sort of practical application. I think once there's a platform for those things to exist, let's say there's a Spotify for NFTs, I think that will be very fascinating. And that will be kind of the model to look towards because that's where people will actually traffic in, not just what an artist actually puts out of their own work, but
Mm-hmm.
the derivations of live performances, remixes, covers, that's a really fascinating, I think, landscape and community that will build around music. But I think we're not there yet.
Yeah, and it's, pretty interesting that you mentioned there be not being a platform for NFTs, like let's say that we have a Spotify NFT platform for music and so forth. And now that we have this whole rise of artificial intelligence, coming right on the verge of or right after the NFTs, I was talking to a friend of mine recently and we were really exploring where would AI go? Would it turn, like the NFTs where they disappear? Or we just do it, based on like what you said, is it something that's just going to attach to our attention for a period of time, and are we going to lose interest in it? But I find that AI is more practical. We can use it for things like music composition to assist in production,
Hmm.
platform. I know that I used it yesterday with BandLab. I use it quite often, with BandLab and mastering my music, and it's like is like pretty much everywhere.
Yeah,
And it helps record labels and artists, with informing them, and getting that information across to
yeah,
their listening data and trends. And I know Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon are actually using these things
yeah.
to
I
assist them.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's the AI, if you're talking about something at a practical application level, is now. I think there's
Yeah.
many applications that most people haven't untapped yet. And that's just to say that technology is what we're dealing with on a larger level of production, consumption, communication. What you and I are doing right now,
Mm-hmm.
podcasts. All of it has practical application. I think AI is probably the most immediate in terms of it's a potential threat to some artists. I think that artists can look at it that way, but I think you're right. It could be something that could be very powerful in terms of a tool to use to improve. Um, I don't know that I'm so enamored with how some music labels and sort of companies are using it to maybe replace some of the talent that's out there, or think about, even when you're talking about music libraries, right? With music libraries for advertising, for instance, that's been a
Hmm.
long existing economy. It's a pretty large economy if you think about where advertising has been and where it's going. Um, there's lots of composers that do film and TV work, and they rely on that income, for their their daily lives. And I think with AI, you can kind of cheat that. There's definitely, I've seen, practical ways that you can kind of cheat the code, right? You can kind of move past some of the talent levels that you need to achieve to land some of those gigs and get some of that work. I think there'll be companies, and there have been companies, there are companies now that are, really kind of replacing people with bots.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know that that's a good evolution. I think that that's something that we need to kind of think about in terms of people's livelihoods, but also just um, what the quality levels that we're looking for in our own lives, right?
Yeah.
I certainly don't know that I want to be watching TV shows that are made by you know sentient beings that that aren't essentially giving me something back in terms of value, that emotional level. I watch a lot of shows, and I know that the threshold is low these days. There's lots of content out there, there's lots
Yeah.
of music content out there, so sometimes it can be confusing. But I do agree with you that I think in the end we'll arrive at a place soon, that some of these tools are very, very powerful in terms of improving our lives and improving the quality of things that we can be. And hopefully, someone was talking about the other day, like, I'd much rather have an AI to do my laundry than be the artwork that I'm looking at. You know what I mean? Because I think that's the value I'm looking for, is make my life easier so I can do those things, so I can spend more time making music and art and reading and writing and things like that. So I don't know. I think that there's a certain value that uh, we need to at least agree upon,
Mm.
as a culture, as a people. What are we looking for from AI? Because if it's just replacing us, then I mean, I think we're all doomed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and just to add to that, and thinking about how you said that your friend would prefer for AI to do his laundry, it's hysterical because the first thing that went to my mind was fast food. We haven't reached to the place where when you go to a restaurant, and you press a few buttons, your food actually pops out and it's hot and ready to eat. But we have various derivatives of that with different forms of fast food. But going back to the topic, I know for sure that this trend has changed the music consumption habits of
Mm.
artists and persons everywhere. Especially with artists and the trend of them actually releasing music or singles more frequently. Because of AI, or rather than just full albums. They're doing like this short form, and AI has also assisted them with a lot of content. I know you spoke about marketing and things like that actually being discontinued because of AI, because you get that opportunity to do everything instantly and you don't get the personal touch anymore. I know I had a friend of mine that said that, she still uses her chat GPT to market on social media, but it doesn't grasp so much, the personalized part or the human part of what marketing is. And even with social media platforms and music consumption being more prevalent, it has its highs and it has its lows. And, we can touch a little bit on mental health awareness and addressing the increase of awareness with persons within the music industry. I know that you spoke about a lot of persons actually losing their jobs. I've been watching it being a constant trend now, and companies are hiring more engineers and persons who can do your back end and front end engineering for softwares to secure jobs. The basic jobs that were needed before in the music business are actually becoming redundant. And with highlighting the importance of support systems and the resources of artists, I know that you discussed, a little bit about the artist or producer that you're working with now,
Mm.
from Miami. And, how is that impacting your sphere of artists and, the persons that you touch with on a day to
Yeah.
day basis, with the change that is going
It's
on right
a
now?
Yeah, it's all happening in real time. I mean, I think that, music business, what I've seen, having been in it for over 20 years, it's the canary in the coal mine of technology, right? It's the quality of life content that we all look towards, and it's part of our day. Everyone has music in their life on some level. I don't know if there's many people that don't hear music on a daily basis, which is kind of interesting, right? And if you talk about the business behind it and the people that are making it and the people that are like myself that are, instrumental in trying to get it out to, folks to hear it, there's this exchange between, and it's just like you said, fast food. It affects, everything is
Yeah,
quality over quantity, right? Do we want just more music? Is that the goal here? Is it just to have more, or is it have better quality of content? And I think we're facing that with film and TV. You look at Netflix and
mhm,
Hulu and all these other platforms. There's so much content. It's the noisiest marketplace I think we've seen. Um, do we really just want more? Is that the goal? And so I think with mental health, that's a that's a real, like I'm saying, it's
mhm,
real time. It's affecting real people's lives. And you're right, it's people getting laid off. It's artists out of work that can't, feed themselves and their families. It's all the other things that you look at in terms of what that quality versus quantity, um, you know, contrast. What's the outcome? And so there are a lot of people that are affected, and a lot of those folks are friends of mine. Frankly, that don't really either they're successful enough and they can kind of get by, but they're still struggling because they're having to keep up, with the quantity part of that exchange. But just because you can write 10 songs in a week doesn't mean you should.
yeah,
It doesn't mean that's good for you, right?
yeah,
And I feel like with that in mind, I think that's where businesses, music businesses and other businesses, fast food businesses as well. Do you
mhm,
want just more burgers,
yeah,
or do you want a really good meal? And the good meal may be the more beneficial to you. It may be more health, if you're talking about the health, and you're in a different country, but the healthcare industry here, mental health is included in that. Is the outcome better if we just have more, of the same thing? Or do we have this as aspiration to make people's lives better and more sustainable? And is that going to help the broader community? Is that going to help the greater good? And, we're facing all sorts of, you know, inequities. I mean, as well as I do, this is not getting better. People's
no,
lives on the bottom end are not getting better.
yeah,
So I think that, music is the canary in the coal mine in a way that, how do we really want to treat other people, our communities, and how do we want to be treated ourselves? So I think there's a broader topic woven in here, but I think on the mental health issue. So there was a DEI, initiative, diversity initiative in the music business that happened over COVID, which was largely, because of the social things that were happening in the world, that led to some good things that were starting to change and starting to improve. I thought, there was some initiatives that were kicked off by some of the major labels, putting funds in place for people to achieve, different benefits from that. That has largely gone away. I think that
mhm,
that's what we're seeing is that those weren't taking that seriously, or either they just decided that maybe they weren't sustainable or that no one cared. But I think do people do care? I think it's just ultimately that you know the bottom dollar, the bottom line was more important. So I
Mm.
think there's a big shift happening, and it's not really a good one from what I can see today. But I do think the independent artists, the independent labels, and the people, minded people like myself, do want to see something change about how artists, the pressures that they're put under,
Mm.
the kind of art we really want to value and don't, want to value. Um, I don't know that there's a platform for all of us to have that exchange right now. I think, comment sections of Twitter and Instagram don't really suffice as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
But I think if we can, I think there's a time that will happen soon, hopefully, that we can start to address those things as a people. And again, I don't know what that looks like today.
Mm.
And hopefully that maybe AI can help that. I don't know. Is that something that AI can do? I don't know.
Yeah, I know for sure, in my sphere of space, we actually have a lot of support groups, and there are a lot of places where you can actually go to speak with, major label companies like you had suggested, and, have this opportunity to talk about topics like this over
Mhm.
platforms like Zoom or Google Meet, that isn't inexpensive,
Mm,
as opposed of if in times before, if I wanted to interview you or vice versa, I would have to catch a flight to you or,
right.
vice versa,
True.
so there are some ways, that we can see where AI and augmented reality AR is actually benefiting us, and it's assisting with reach, but or however, it's necessarily to get into those focus groups, even if it may be, like you said, commenting on Twitter, or if somebody posted something on LinkedIn, and actually getting your voice out there in different ways. And
Mm,
I know before we wrap up, I wanted us to talk a little bit about post COVID, or post pandemic, because I heard you touch on it just for a brief
mm,
moment. And how has that impacted us? I know with future trends, I have been hearing a lot that um, persons are not so interested into the virtual concerts and augmented reality. Yes, for certain, it was pretty interesting at the moment, when we had to do things like that. And also introducing things like green touring,
mm,
reducing environmental impact with touring, and, actually being eco friendly. But going back to post COVID, these were things that were established after COVID, and, we can see where they have affected us in positive ways and also negatively, based on our conversation before. And
mm,
how moving forward can we address in your own way, apart from focus groups and actually getting what you need from major label, sorry, and getting your voice be heard. What else do you think is missing, or what can we add, to the world, saying that everyone is actually adjusting to life from COVID, because this is where all of the adjustments came from. If we can be
mhm,
honest, we adjusted to the virtual world simply because that everyone wanted to be normal in such an abnormal situation, um, um, and dealing with such a bio disaster that presented itself at the moment.
yeah,
And that created the landscape of the catastrophe of what we're experiencing now, because business owners, companies, labels, they made up in their minds that, hey, we can't come to the place again where we would, feel handicapped. Something may happen. Okay, we like the remote jobs and everything, and we have that opportunity to connect virtually, but let's find cheaper ways, or other ways to get things done, in case of something like COVID happening again, and we have to shut down the world and still be able to function.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, post-COVID,
Mhm.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
COVID opened up all sorts of different questions and conundrums. I think you're right. The live side was probably the most affected, right? I was working with several artists as a manager pre-COVID. I kind of got out because I realized that there could be a catastrophe like that. Not that I was predicting it, but I was seeing kind of real time how cancellations and even weather and things like that were affecting the bottom line for us as a team. You know, we couldn't get to the places we needed to, or we had to compromise in terms of being able to achieve the goals that we were setting for ourselves. I think that's real, and I think that's continuing to be the biggest question mark for me in terms of, how do you build an audience as an artist, and how do you keep that audience? And then, if you're talking about like Taylor Swift, and that woman has been around the world how many times this year, and she's
Mhm.
not stopping. And
Yeah.
that's a huge economy around her. So I think we have to think about like what would something like COVID do if
Mhm.
every artist had to achieve that same level of travel and being in front of a live audience. I don't know
Mhm.
the answer. That's a really strange one for me if I'm being honest. I think in
Mhm.
terms of everything else, the work of it, I do think that not working every day in the office has been a godsend if you're asking me, because it's allowed me to see my family a little bit more. It's allowed me to be a little more normal in my day to day.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not something that I kind of have to think about. I used to, and I was thinking about that recently, like driving to the office every day and what that used to be like, and I can't even remember. But
Mhm.
I'm glad to say that I don't, have anybody that's over my shoulder, wondering where I'm at every single moment of every day. I certainly have a phone that rings all the time, but I can live with that. You know what I mean? I can just turn it off or put it on vibrate. The other COVID questions that come up are I think more practical and more sort of about what I talked about in terms of quality of life. I did miss the community building that you can do when you're in person. And
Mhm.
I think streaming doesn't achieve that. I
Yeah.
think no amount of Zoom concerts or virtual reality headsets are going to, take the place of human to human community building. I think that's something I yearned for over COVID. I didn't know how much I missed it until I started seeing it again, and now that I'm back with my friends and people that I care about, I think it's something that I don't know how you achieve that with other, you know, platforms. So, yeah, there's definitely a practical concern, and I think that, we're working through it. I think as a people, we're trying to figure it out. I travel a little bit, not as much as I used to. The
Mhm.
travel thing is very strange. I can't imagine being a pilot or a stewardess right
Mhm.
now. But those are the things that I think, as a people, will eventually start to come up with solutions and ways to deal with those things. The post-COVID music world, it's largely back. I was at a concert not too long ago with Fred again. That 70,000 people showing up in an LA concert, selling out within days. That's tremendous, and that's not something you can kind of replace.
Yeah.
Um, and there's not every artist can do that.
Mhm.
But, um, but should it happen for every artist and should it be the norm? I don't think so.
Mm. Okay, great. Yeah, that was a brilliant way to conclude. We actually don't have the answers to how to get back to normal, but I liked how you said that, having that opportunity to touch your friends, go in public spaces again, and actually participate into a live concert, and actually having that full human experience, away from the augmented reality and what virtual or online would represent, even though you haven't continued or branched completely into, the whole immersion of music again. It's good to see where you are at now. And Todd,
Yeah.
right before we leave, I would like you to share your socials with my listening audience so they can get in touch with you.
Okay.
Those who may be listening and would like to reach out to you.
Sure. Um, channel I seem to get the most traction from is Instagram.
Okay.
So me if you like. Uh, LinkedIn is the same. LinkedIn.com, Todd C. Roberts. I think that, for me, the communication is, I don't take it, lightly. So if you reach out, I hope that you do want to hear from me, or that you're engaging in some meaningful way. Because, yeah, I do like to help people. I like to reach out to folks that need it and want advice. So, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. And thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Thank you. No, thank you, Lindera.
Yes. You take care now.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Bye.